You should see these disturbing historical photos. After watching, don't forget to write your impressions in the comments. Between 1904 and 1908, German colonial troops in today's Namibia chained Herero and Nama prisoners during the first genocide of the 20th century. About 80% of the Herero and half of the Nama died after extermination orders, camps, and desert expulsions.
In 1943, British engineers deliberately tested underwater charges against an X-Craft midget submarine to see how much damage its hull could survive. This photo shows the port side after the fourth blast, part of secret preparation for operations before D-Day.
After the Battle of Tianjin in 1900, an American soldier held a canteen to a wounded Japanese ally beside a temporary aid station. Japan and the United States were both in the Eight-Nation Alliance, fighting through China during the Boxer War.
On January 25, 1998, American tourists Tom and Eileen Lonergan were left behind by their dive boat in Australia's Coral Sea. Their absence was missed for 2 days, and only torn gear and Tom's final written message were later found. On May 17, 1944, an 18-year-old British princess inspected the 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards during preparations for the Normandy landings. Less than 3 weeks later, many soldiers like these would cross into one of the most dangerous operations of World War II.
Al-Tamani stood over 7 feet 4 inches tall, while Jeannie was 2 feet 6 inches and moved on her hands. They married after meeting at a fair in 1936, then settled in Florida and raised 2 adopted daughters.
In 1873, investigators found at least 11 bodies buried near the Bender family inn in Labette County, Kansas. The family had served travelers at their roadside home, robbed them, and vanished before the graves were opened. Near the end of World War II, German engineers tested a Fiesler Fi-103 flying bomb as a towed fuel tank for the Arado 234 jet. Dragging a former weapon behind a jet just to gain range shows how desperate the experiments had become. During World War I, mercy dogs carried bandages and searched battlefields for wounded soldiers when medics could not safely reach them. If a soldier was still alive, the dog could lead stretcher teams back through mud, smoke, and shell fire. In July 1921, more than 10,000 people flooded Times Square just to get updates on Jack Dempsey fighting Georges Carpentier. The bout became boxing's first million-dollar gate, while thousands still had to stand in the street to learn each round. In the 1960s, the United States Army fielded the Davy Crockett, a small launcher designed to fire a nuclear warhead from the battlefield. Its range was so short that the crew could still be dangerously close to the radioactive zone after firing. In 1983, Diane Downs was arrested after claiming a stranger had attacked her 3 children during a carjacking in Oregon. Investigators later proved she staged the story herself. 1 child did not survive, and 2 lived with life-changing injuries. In 1838, American adventurer Josiah Harlan became known as the Prince of Gore after leading forces in Afghanistan. He later claimed to have freed more than 400 enslaved people from warlord Murad Beg before returning to America and serving in the Union Army. Jacob Miller was a Union soldier who survived a bullet wound to the forehead during the American Civil War and lived until age 87. In this 1910 photo, he wears his veteran medal, with the mark of the wound still visible decades later. On July 12, 1979, rock fans flooded Comiskey Park in Chicago for Disco Demolition Night, where disco records were destroyed between baseball games. The crowd stormed the field afterward, forcing the White Sox to forfeit the second game. On August 14, 1945,
New Yorkers filled the streets after news that Japan would surrender, marking the end of World War II. By morning, Times Square and nearby blocks were buried in torn paper from one of the largest celebrations in the city's history. Pearl Rambo was only 14 when she was exhibited in carnivals and advertised as weighing about 276 kilograms. Her life ended in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic, after a childhood spent as a public attraction.
In 1977, photographer J. Ross Bauman documented Gray's scouts in Rhodesia holding a black prisoner with a rope around his neck. His Pulitzer-winning photos exposed how prisoners could be beaten, threatened, and dragged during the Rhodesian Bush War. In Vancouver in 1910, firefighters demonstrated a tall, extendable ladder mounted on a vehicle, a major upgrade for reaching upper floors. Men climbed high above the street with no modern harnesses, turning a rescue tool into a public test of nerve.
On January 1, 1930, this photo showed the modest house in Goree, Georgia, where Joseph Stalin was born. By then, the small birthplace was already being turned into part of the official cult around the Soviet leader.
On April 5, 1942, Japanese-American children from San Pedro, California, were loaded into a guarded truck during the wartime removal. Many were United States citizens, yet their families were sent away under Executive Order 9066, with only what they could carry.
In 1975, the British frigate Achilles suffered a crushed bow after colliding with the Greek tanker Olympic Alliance. The damage tore open the front of the warship, but it still made it back to port.
On June 18, 1931, Prohibition agents in Newark destroyed barrels of illegal beer seized during a Hoboken raid. Thousands of liters were dumped in public, showing how far America went to enforce the alcohol ban.
In 1944, United States troops found these Soviet prisoners behind German barbed wire in France. Far from the Eastern Front, liberation did not always mean freedom, because many returned Soviet prisoners were later sent through harsh filtration camps before going home.
In 1954, KGB officer Nikolai Koklov defected in West Germany and handed over hidden Soviet attack devices meant for a planned operation in Frankfurt. He had been ordered to target anti-communist activist Georgy Okolovich, but warned him instead and exposed the mission.
This 1890s photo is believed to be the only known image of a wild Caucasian wisent, a bison type once found in the Caucasus. The last wild animals were gone by 1927, and only hybrid descendants survive today through one captive bull.
In 1988, Kenneth Parks left court after one of the strangest criminal defenses in modern Canada. He said he drove about 14 miles while sleepwalking, killed his mother-in-law, attacked his father-in-law, and was later acquitted because the court accepted automatism.
On May 6, 1976, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck northeastern Italy, killing 978 people and leaving about 157,000 homeless. This photo shows rescuers searching rubble after the Friuli disaster, where entire villages were damaged in seconds.
Andor Gongor was a Mongolian man reliably measured at 7 feet 9 inches tall, photographed in 1922. The son of a herder, he later worked at Bogd Khan's palace as an accountant, bodyguard, and elephant keeper.
In Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1993, Bosniak soldiers sat in darkness minutes before an assault on a Croat enclave in central Bosnia. The soldier on the left lost his leg in the first minutes of action, making this photo a record of the last calm before disaster. In Florida in 1979, David Funchess stood at a resentencing hearing that sent him back to death row after a murder conviction.
Later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, he became the first Vietnam War veteran executed in the United States.
On August 20th, 1998, United States cruise missiles destroyed Sudan's Al-Shifa factory, which supplied much of the country's medicine. No confirmed weapons production was found, making the strike one of the most disputed actions of the decade.
In January 2000, 19-year-old Zeb Quinn vanished in Asheville, North Carolina, after leaving work for what should have been a short drive. 2 weeks later, his car was found with its lights on, lipstick marks on the rear window, and a live Labrador puppy inside. In 1954, a couple on a California beach learned their nearly 2-year-old child had been swept into the ocean by a wave. The photo won the 1955 Pulitzer Prize because it captured the exact moment before any search could bring good news.
A North Vietnamese officer offered his hand to a South Vietnamese soldier, but the handshake was refused in a moment that showed how deep the war's divide still was. More than 20 years later, that same officer defected to France, became an enemy of the regime, and died there in 2018.
In Italian East Africa in 1937, these women were imprisoned at the Danane colonial camp, where detainees faced forced labor, malaria, and severe punishments. The reported death rate was nearly half, making this photo a rare record of a little-known Italian colonial camp. Chinese herbalist Li Qingyun was claimed to have lived from 1677 to 1933, reaching 256 years, but this age was never verified. His story became famous because newspapers treated him as a possible record holder, while historians still question the documents behind the claim. In the early 1900s, police in Nizhny Novgorod photographed women detained at one of the Russian Empire's largest fairs for working outside the official registry. The numbered papers were police identifiers, turning each woman into a file for inspection and control.
In 1944, 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. became the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. 70 years later, a South Carolina court erased his conviction, saying he had not received a fair trial.
On March 6, 1981, Marianne Bachmeier brought a Beretta pistol into a West German courtroom and shot Klaus Grabowski. He was on trial for killing her 7-year-old daughter, Anna, making the case one of Germany's most infamous courtroom revenge stories. Anna Etheridge followed her Union soldier husband into the Civil War, but stayed as a battlefield nurse even after he deserted. She treated wounded men under fire and became one of only 2 women awarded the Kearney Cross for bravery. On May 18, 1980, photographer Robert Landsberg was shooting Mount St. Helens when the eruption overtook him. Realizing he could not escape, he lay over his camera to protect the film, and rescuers found his photos intact 17 days later. Sylvia Porter became a sideshow performer after a painful condition caused extreme swelling in her legs and feet. She was known for speaking proudly with audiences and defending fellow performers as sideshows began losing work in the 20th century. In Kyoto, 5 temples are said to have had ceilings made from floorboards taken from Fushimi Castle after its siege in 1600. The marks remain from Tori Mototada and about 380 samurai who held out for 11 days against an army of 40,000. In Chinese Turkestan, around 1913, a prisoner wore a kang, a wooden collar used as public punishment. Its size made eating, drinking, and sleeping difficult, so survival depended on whether people nearby chose to help. On July 26, 1938, John William Ward stood for 11 hours on a 17th floor ledge of New York's Gotham Hotel, while hundreds watched from below.
Traffic officer Charles Glasgow disguised himself as a hotel worker and talked to him for hours, but Ward still fell before rescuers could pull him inside. On May 1st, 1989, an Antonov II crashed during a holiday leaflet drop over Sechanovo in the Soviet Union, killing all 5 people on board. Investigators found the crew had no proper flight plan, flew too low in strong wind, and the captain had been drinking.
On June 8, 1967, Israeli forces attacked the USS Liberty, a United States Navy intelligence ship, killing 34 Americans and injuring 174. Israel called it a mistake, but the incident remains one of the most disputed moments of the Six-Day War.
From 1936 to 1945, Unit 731 operated near Harbin in occupied Manchuria as Japan's secret biological warfare center. Prisoners were used as test subjects for disease and weapons research, and the program was later linked to hundreds of thousands of deaths.
In 1968, Royal Air Force pilot Alan Pollock flew a Hawker Hunter jet through Tower Bridge after the service's 50th anniversary was barely noticed. He had already passed low over Parliament in central London, turning one personal protest into Britain's most famous unauthorized flight. On November 22, 1987, an unknown person in a Max Headroom mask interrupted 2 Chicago television broadcasts with a distorted signal. The Federal Bureau of Investigation examined the case, but the person behind one of the strangest television mysteries in American media was never identified.
Shanghai, November 22, 1937. British soldiers shake hands with Imperial Japanese troops at a barbed wire checkpoint. Foreign troops were still inside the city as Japan tightened control around Shanghai. Early 1900s, Venezuela. Cipriano Castro sits beside Juan Vicente Gomez, the trusted deputy who controlled the army. In 1908, Gomez pushed Castro out while he was abroad and ruled Venezuela until 1935. This was not sunrise over the Pacific, but the butternut test at Eniwetok Atoll on May 12, 1958. The device released 81 kilotons from a barge, turning the ocean horizon white in a rare color photograph. May 1910, Wilmington, Delaware. Lewis Hine photographed Frank Gibson, a 14-year-old Western Union messenger who still went to school. His record said he worked until 12:30 at night and guided soldiers through the city adult district. Agordat, Eritrea, March 25, 1941. Pilot Officer Kennedy inspects his Royal Air Force Wellesley bomber after meeting 2 Italian Fiat biplanes in the air. The open wing shows how a slow, older bomber still made it back during the East African campaign. Nepal, 2005. Juna Rai, known as Comrade Chunauti, commanded the 16th Battalion during the movement to end the monarchy. Her brothers served on the other side, and after the conflict she was integrated into the National Army. Believed to be near Ypres in 1915, this rare night photograph caught a German barrage lighting up the ground beside Allied trenches. For one instant, the flash made the wire, posts, and empty strip of land visible, with the front line hidden only a short distance away. In 1945, Louis Slotin and Herb Lair stood beside the partly assembled Trinity gadget, prepared for the first atomic test in New Mexico. Slotin became especially remembered because 1 year later, he was involved in a criticality accident during another plutonium core test. December 6, 1993. The Independent profiled Osama bin Laden as a Saudi businessman building roads in Sudan after recruiting fighters for Afghanistan. The headline is striking because it framed him as a former anti-Soviet figure years before his name became known worldwide for a very different reason. In 1921, a stuntman climbed down from a low biplane toward a moving car on a dirt road. The pilot and driver had to hold the same speed so he could land on the car in one clean move without modern safety gear. In 1918 New York, street cleaners worked behind cloth masks while the Spanish flu moved fast through the city. Officials used the slogan "better to look foolish than take the risk" making this photo feel strangely modern. At 7 feet 7 inches, Sandy Allen could make an ordinary boardwalk look like a record book page. In the 1970s, she was known as the world's tallest woman, and the sign behind her turned her real height into the main attraction. In the 1960s, Australian javelin thrower Reg Spears was stranded in London with no money, so he mailed himself home to Australia in a wooden crate. He packed food, water, a blanket, and a small light, then spent more than 2 days traveling as cargo. Mid-1920s, Violet and Daisy Hilton were photographed during the years when their stage career made them two of the most recognized conjoined twins in America. In the 1930s, they won legal freedom from their managers, but later worked in a Charlotte grocery store far from the spotlight. Badenviller, France, May 18, 1918. An American marksman holds a Springfield rifle wrapped in camouflage and fitted with a telescopic sight. The cover was meant to hide the rifle's outline, showing how fast battlefield methods were changing in 1918. Dolores Pullard stood 7 feet 9 inches tall and was listed by the Guinness Book of World Records as the tallest living woman of her time. Behind the crown and cape was a church singer and Sunday school teacher who used sideshow earnings to pay for medical care. Italy, May 18, 1944. Soldiers of the 2nd Polish Corps climbed the rocky slope at Monte Cassino after months of failed Allied assaults. That same day, Polish troops reached the ruined monastery, helping open the road toward Rome. On November 11, 1961, 2 Italian United Nations aircraft landed at Kindu in Congo, where local troops mistook the crews for hostile forces. 13 Italian airmen lost their lives there, and this newspaper page shows how the Kindu tragedy shocked Italy. The Shakers began in 1747 with radical ideas about simple living and equality, but they also rejected marriage and required lifelong celibacy. That one rule meant the community could grow only through converts and adopted children, helping explain why it nearly vanished. Aberdeen, May 25, 1986. 19-year-old Kurt Cobain was booked after police found him trespassing on an abandoned warehouse roof. This was years before Nirvana, when his name was still only known around his small Washington hometown. Mississippi, 1939. Children studied in a racially segregated classroom 15 years before the Supreme Court ruled such schools unequal. Their small wooden room and shared table reveal the underfunded system that Brown versus Board of Education challenged in 1954. After Gettysburg in 1863, local photographers sold this portrait as the so-called Ghoul of Gettysburg, a man accused in local lore of looting fallen soldiers on the battlefield. Very few copies survive, and even his real name and full story remain unclear. Near Pittsburgh on March 11th, 1927, Paul Jaworski and the Flatheads gang stopped a Brinks armored truck by setting a charge under Bethel Road. They took more than $104,000, but their getaway car was trapped in the very hole the blast had made. Miami, February 15th, 1933. Franklin Roosevelt survived when Giuseppe Zangara fired from the crowd just weeks before inauguration. Roosevelt was untouched, but Chicago Mayor Anton Kermak was struck and later passed away. German-occupied Poland, 1939. Teachers, priests, doctors, officials, and local leaders were rounded up during intelligence action to break the country's educated class. About 60,000 people lost their lives, and these photos show the arrests behind one of the occupation's most calculated campaigns. Nashville, 1989. 19-year-old Tammy Middlebrooks sits beside her public defender during her guilty plea in the Carrick Majors case. The detail that shocked Tennessee was the trigger, a broken $2 vose, followed by the death of a 14-year-old boy. Harrisburg, February 2nd, 1897. Pennsylvania's state capitol burned while crowds stood outside in the snow. 9 years later, a much grander state house opened on the same site and became one of the most ornate capitals in the United States. Milwaukee, 1980. Former police officer Louis Krause told 60 Minutes that a 1958 case ruled justified had been built on a false story. His confession said a knife was planted after a black suspect lost his life, turning a closed file into a national broadcast scandal. Finland, 1940s. Simo Haiha sits with his dog Kila after becoming the Winter War marksman Soviet troops knew as the White Death. He used iron sights instead of a scope to avoid lens glare, and Finnish records credit him with more than 500 confirmed wartime hits. Washington Dulles, September 11th, 2001. Passengers board American Airlines Flight 77 before its final morning departure. Hours later, the plane was taken over and flown into the Pentagon, making this quiet airport frame one of its last known images. Liberated France, 1944. Women accused of helping the occupation were marched through towns after their heads were shaved in public. The punishment was meant to mark them forever, and these scenes became some of the most uncomfortable images of post-war revenge. On June 10, 1990, a wrongly fitted windshield blew out on British Airways Flight 5390, pulling Captain Timothy Lancaster halfway outside at 17,300 feet. The crew held him until landing, and 5 months later, he returned to flying. In 1901, Annie Edson Taylor became the first known person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive. This photo shows her being pulled from the water, still inside the barrel, after a stunt she hoped would make her famous and secure her future. La Combe Cemetery, Memorial Day, 1945. French teenager Helene Chapelle kneels at the grave of James Simonian, an American soldier from Normandy. She reads a letter from his mother, who asked that her words reach him in France. During the First World War, 17-year-old English soldier Leonard Knight survived when a German round struck the pocket Bible he carried. It passed through nearly the whole book and stopped only about 50 pages from the end. Brooklyn, 1982. A New York police officer holds the iron rod kept as evidence after the racial attack on Willie Turks. Turks and 2 other black workers were walking home when a crowd confronted them, exposing a case many Americans did not expect to see in modern New York. On August 23, 1989, about 2 million people formed the Baltic chain across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The human line stretched for hundreds of kilometers, demanding freedom 50 years after the pact that had helped seal Soviet control. In 1826, Jules Dumont d'Urville reported a giant rogue wave, but the claim was dismissed because such waves were thought impossible. Only in 1995 did an oil platform finally measure one, proving that old sailors' stories were real ocean science. San Jose, 1933. A crowd used a heavy beam to break into the county jail after 2 men were accused in the Brooke Hart kidnapping case. The governor later praised the crowd, making the case one of California's most shocking examples of public justice outside the courtroom. On November 13, 1963, a United States Navy pilot ejected from a Vought Crusader and landed safely in the water. The rescue helicopter later went down near Oceana Naval Air Station, and he survived that second emergency too. South Carolina, January 9, 1986. 25-year-old James Terry Roach gives an interview the day before his sentence was carried out. He was 17 when he pleaded guilty in a 1977 case involving 3 deaths and said he learned to read and write while in prison. Singapore, February 26, 1942. A Chinese father feeds his daughter rice inside their damaged home after a Japanese air raid. The bowl, spoon, broken furniture, and open wall make the scene feel unreal, like normal life paused inside the ruins. In 1942, German agents from Operation Pastorius landed by submarine in the United States with plans to damage key American targets. 2 men reported the mission to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and these mugshots show the 6 who were later sentenced to death. In 1879, Henry Floss created one of the first practical rebreathing diving devices, allowing a diver to carry oxygen instead of relying on air pumped from the surface. Its strange mask and looping tubes made it look futuristic, but it helped open the path to modern underwater breathing gear. Sinai, 1967. Egyptian prisoners ride past an Israeli column during the Six-Day War, both moving along the same desert road. The frame explains the speed of the campaign in one detail. One army advances while the other is carried away. North Sea, April 8, 1940. The British destroyer Glowworm is seen through the gun sight of the German cruiser Admiral Hipper. Minutes later, Glowworm rammed the larger ship, turning a losing fight into one of the war's boldest naval moments. California, 1909. Korean nationalist Jang In-hwan was photographed after his conviction in the fatal shooting of pro-Japan lobbyist Durham White Stevens. The jury spared him from a death sentence, partly because Stevens had publicly defended Japan's takeover of Korea. Central Asia, 1920s. Captured Basmachi fighters stand under Soviet guard during the brutal struggle for control of the region. The image is chilling because it shows the final minutes of a resistance movement that Moscow spent years trying to crush. Beirut, 1981. The Iraqi embassy collapsed after a blast linked to the Dawa Party, one of the early major embassy attacks of its kind. 61 people lost their lives, and the ruined building became one of the most shocking images from Lebanon that year. Charles Pretty Boy Floyd became public enemy number 1 during the Great Depression, with a $5,000 reward on his wanted poster. Many poor locals still hid him from police, seeing him as an outlaw who stood against banks. Los Angeles, January 1942. Perry Butler fell 10 floors from a building and landed on the hood of a parked car. The headline sounded impossible because he was badly hurt but still expected to survive. In the 19th century, some wealthy native nations in the American South used enslaved black labor to build farms, trade networks, and stronger governments. For their leaders, emancipation threatened not only wealth, but the political project they hoped would protect their land from United States expansion. Georgia, 1945. Lena Baker, a black maid, was sentenced after the fatal shooting of her white employer, Ernest Knight, in a case she said was self-defense. 60 years later, Georgia granted her a posthumous pardon, making this prison photo part of a long-delayed correction. Wad Tong, February 1st, 1953. Floodwater covers streets and rooftops after the North Sea storm surge broke through Dutch defenses. It became the Netherlands' worst natural disaster of the 20th century and led to the massive Delta Works barrier program. In 1940, this French identity card belonged to Annie Yolande Horowitz, a Jewish child from Strasbourg, with her small portrait and fingerprint recorded by officials. She was later deported to Auschwitz, making this ordinary paper one of the last traces of her life. In 1899, Gay Jewel was advertised as the world's heaviest man, a title used by sideshows to pull paying crowds. The violin in his hands shows he was presented as a stage entertainer, not only as a body-size attraction. Argentina, 1977. French nuns Alice Domon and Léonie Duquet were seized after helping families search for people who had vanished under the military regime. This staged photo with a Montoneros banner was meant to brand them as guerrilla supporters before they too disappeared. Victorian England, 1880. Young chimney sweeps posed in work clothes from a trade that once sent small boys into narrow household flues. By then, British laws were already pushing the practice out, making this a late look at one of the hardest children's jobs of the era. Warsaw, 1943. German soldiers questioned Jewish men after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the first major urban revolt against German occupation in Europe. The ghetto had been sealed since 1940, and its last fighters resisted for nearly a month with few weapons before the district was destroyed. German East Africa, First World War. A young Askari is shown with a carved elephant foot used to mask human tracks during Leto Vorbeck's guerrilla campaign. The trick made small patrols harder to follow. turning the ground itself into part of the escape plan. Frontline, 1917. A soldier has a tooth pulled on the edge of a wagon, using the Army road as a dental room. No clinic, no chair, no privacy. Just a quick procedure before the column moved again. West Virginia, November 14th, 1970. The Marshall University football team's charter plane went down while returning from an away game. 75 people were lost, making it the deadliest sports-related air disaster in United States history. Saigon, June 11th, 1963. Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc self-immolated in protest against South Vietnam's treatment of Buddhists. His still posture during the act made the photo one of the most powerful images of the 1960s. Haifa, 1946. A husband and wife reunite after deportation separated them in 1941. The year matters because Israel did not exist yet, and many surviving families were still searching for each other in British Mandate Palestine. Texas City, April 16th, 1947. Workers spray water on the burning SS Grand Camp, not yet knowing its cargo of ammonium nitrate was about to ignite. Minutes later, the port was shattered in the deadliest industrial disaster in United States history. May 18th, 1980. A local baseball game continued while Mount St. Helens rose behind the field in a towering ash cloud. The eruption sent ash across Washington, turning an ordinary pitch into one of the strangest sports photographs of the century. In 1937, Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan posed shortly before their final attempt to fly around the world. On July 2nd, their plane vanished over the Pacific, turning this calm departure photo into part of aviation's most famous mystery. First World War, around 1915. Early gas masks could be simple cloth hoods with glass eyepieces and a breathing tube. They look strange today because armies were still inventing protection against a new kind of battlefield danger. In 1982, this photo captured the grandfather of 6-year-old Renee Shin-Yi Chen at her funeral after the Twilight Zone movie set helicopter accident. Her death, along with actor Vic Morrow and another child actor, led to major questions about safety rules in Hollywood filming. Appleton, Wisconsin, August 19th, 1992. Lori Jean DePies arrived at her boyfriend's apartment, but her locked car was found outside with a cup of soda still on the roof. That small detail became the haunting clue in a disappearance that seemed to happen only steps from the door. Washington, January 13th, 1982. Air Florida Flight 90 sits at the gate minutes before takeoff, with snow already covering the airport. The aircraft was not properly cleared of ice, and soon after departure it fell into the Potomac River. Late Qing, China. Prisoners wear kongs, heavy wooden collars that trapped the neck and hands while they stood in public. Some weighed tens of pounds, so even eating or drinking often depended on strangers until the sentence ended. Northern Ireland, 1981. These 10 Irish Republican prisoners lost their lives during the Maze prison hunger strike over political prisoner status. Their portraits became symbols of a protest that pushed the prison conflict into world headlines. Belgrade Front, 1944. 2 Yugoslav women, partisans from the 1st Proletarian Brigade, stand with rifles before the push to free the city. Their worn clothes and heavy weapons show how the partisan army used young volunteers in direct combat, not only in support roles. Paris, early 20th century. Fyodor Makhno, advertised as a Russian giant at about 2 meters 39 centimeters, stands outside a hat shop on Rue de la Monnaie. Ohio, 1967. This aerial photo shows bright industrial waste flowing into the Cuyahoga River near Cleveland. 2 years later, the river caught fire again, helping turn local pollution into a national environmental scandal. Ouessant, France, August 1917. French sailors pose on the wreck of German submarine UC-61 after it ran aground near the coast. Its crew abandoned and scuttled the boat, leaving a rare close-up trophy from the undersea war. Vietnam, Christmas 1972. North and South Vietnamese soldiers meet in the narrow no man's land between their trenches. For a short truce, the same ground usually watched through rifle sights became a place for cautious handshakes and shared silence. Paris, 1993. This is considered one of the final known photos of the legendary wrestler during a family visit for his father's funeral. 3 days later, he passed away in his sleep from heart failure linked to the growth disorder behind his extraordinary size. Which photo did you like the most? Write in the comments. I will be glad to read them.